let's talk more about wage differentials in general. So as I said, we talked about human capital as being one reason why different people get paid different wages. However, that is not the whole story. There are other reasons why people might get paid different wages. And that's what we're going to be talking about today and possibly a bit of tomorrow as well. If we think of wages purely as being about human capital, then this labor demand curve is accurate. It is the correct labor demand curve. There's no point paying anybody anything else. If the labor market's competitive and wage differentials are only about human capital, then this is accurate. You don't need to go any more complex. Right? This is what's called the marginal productivity theory of wage. Roughly, people get paid at least what the marginal person produces. The entire reason why people get paid different wages, the human capital story, is that they are differently productive for any number of reasons. Could be because they're in different industries, whatever. So we're going to think about what else our model might be leaving out, because this is clearly an incomplete story. The world is much more complex than that. So we're going to be talking today about things that specifically affect the wage that is paid without just being marginal productivity of labor. So things that might make people get paid different amounts, even if they are equally productive. There's going to be a lot of these things, right? This is basically a lot of the field of labor economics, which is way more than we're going to cover in 1 week of a principles of micro class. We're not going to go through all these things. These are just a list of different descriptions of things that might be going on for wage differentials. If you're interested, you can look at more of them on your own. But we will be covering a few of them. So we can cover just 3 of them today that I think are particularly useful to know about. And again, these are all explanations of why different people might get paid different wages, even if they are equally productive. Right? So the marginal productivity of labor is the same. The price of the good that they're selling is the same, and yet they're getting paid different wages. So the 3 that we're going to focus on are compensating differentials, labor unions, and discrimination. We're going to talk about all 3 of those. Yeah, so we always are asking, even though people are equally skilled, why is one person being paid more? We'll start with compensating differentials. So a compensating differential occurs when one job is more or less enjoyable to work at than another, for a very broad definition of enjoyable. It doesn't necessarily need to be a fun workplace. It just needs to be, if these 2 places were paying the exact same wage, most people would pick this one over that for whatever reason, right? It could be that it's more fun. It could be that it's a more professional work environment. It could be that it's more flexible hours. It could be that people will look at you nicely when you do it, right? Whatever reason it is. So the compensating differential is this. If you want somebody to work at a job people would be less likely to want to work at, you got to pay them more to do it. That's the thing. And so you'd expect, comparing 2 jobs or occupations or whatever that require the same level of skill, you'd expect people to get paid more at the job that people don't want to work at. Because otherwise, how are they going to hire anybody? Right? Who would, given these 2 occupations, you have the skill to go into either, because we already determined that these are equally skilled jobs. So you're always going to choose the better one, unless the other one's willing to pay you a bit more to offset what you're giving up. So if a group of people is equally capable of working at job A or job B, but fewer of them want to work at job B is going to have to offer a higher wage in order to get people to work there, and thus you'll see that people in job B get paid more than people in job A. And this can work across a bunch of different sort of levels of specificity, how close in you focus, right? It could be, could be in the same job. It could be that one workplace is just a better environment to be at than another, right? If you hear that a particular company is like a real grinder of a place to work at, and people yell at you, and they'll email you at 3 a.m. and expect you to have work done by 4 a.m., right? That sort of thing. You're not going to want to work there. And if anybody is going to work there, they're going to expect to get paid a whole lot. So you'd expect that company to pay quite a bit more. It could also go across different kinds of jobs, as long as you're talking about different kinds of jobs that require similar levels of skill. So if one of those jobs is more enjoyable, again, for a broad definition of enjoyable, then you'd expect people to get paid less at that enjoyable job, because you don't need to pay them to attract workers. So why would you bother paying them more? Let's do one example of this. One common example of this is the risk that's inherent in a job. Imagine 2 different jobs that require similar levels of skill, but one of them is a riskier job to work in. There's a higher chance that you're going to get injured or killed on the job in the process of doing that job. A lot of different examples of this. Taxi cab drivers have a very high injury rate. Police officers, soldiers, security guards, anybody who, I mean, if their job is to, at some level, be on guard against people, then you'd expect them to, at some point, more likely to get injured. So to work in these positions, you have to pay people more than you would pay at a similarly skilled job that is safer. Otherwise, why would people do it? And we do indeed see this in data. If you look at labor market data, a pretty consistent finding across a lot of different studies is that roughly a 1% chance or higher risk of workplace death leads to about $100,000 more in lifetime earnings as opposed to another job with a, say, safer environment, right? So two jobs take the same level of skill. This job over here is 1% more likely you're going to die on the job. You'd expect that over the lifetime, this job is going to pay $100,000 more. Because again, you can imagine if they were equally skilled, and you saw those two jobs both had openings, you'd be like, well, why would I go work at the one where I'm more likely to die? I'll go work at the one where I'm safer. Unless there's some other reason like money that would make you want to do the riskier. So there are lots of different ways in which enjoyable can come. Right? I said enjoyable is a very broad category, and it is. It can include a lot of different things. It could be how fun it is. It could be how noble it is or idealized it is. Do you think that you're doing good in the world? That is one reason why you might pick one job even if it pays less, right? It could also be how enjoyable a given profession or work environment is. Lots and lots of examples of this, right? You hear people like, yeah, I want to go be an environmental lawyer. Well, that's going to pay less than working for a big corporation because people really want to be environmental lawyers, often more so than they want to be big corporate lawyers. And so if you want to get people to be corporate lawyers, you got to pay them more in order to get them to do it over doing something that they might find a bit more satisfying, perhaps. For being a professor is an example of this. Most professors, I mean, you're in the business school, pretty much every professor you have could get paid more if they quit their job and went to the private sector in the business school. And yet we don't, because this is a very fun job to have. I love it, and I will never quit until I have to. They'll carry me out on a stretcher when I'm 90. Or if the federal government decides to discontinue Pell Grants. We'll see. But because we really enjoy the job, we're willing to take the pay cut because we get to work in a job that we really like doing. One place where you see this is in programming for video game companies. A lot of programmers, on average, tend to be more likely to play video games than people who are not programmers, at least by some degree. And so a lot of them would be very interested in going to work for a video game company. They like video games, they enjoy playing video games, they like talking about video games, and so you offer a job at a video game company, they're going to want to take that. So what do we see as a result? We see that video game programmers get paid less than programmers in other industries, which is exactly what you'd expect from a compensating differentials perspective. Imagine you're a video game company, right? You want to hire some good programmers. You think, well, I could pay what everybody else pays. I could pay the same as what people who make accounting software pay or whatever. But I don't have to. Everyone really wants to work for me. People are knocking down my door. I can offer to pay less and they will still come work for me. So you might as well pay less. That's the profit maximizing thing to do. Creative work falls into this line a lot, right? Often, a lot of creative people would rather do their own projects. This usually pays less than working for somebody else, right? Being an artist, it's going to pay more generally if you are painting the things that a company wants you to paint than if you are working on your own art. And yet, a lot of people would prefer to be an independent artist, so they're willing to take the pay cut and risk having less money because it allows them to express their creative selves in a way that they would often prefer. Okay. This also pops up a lot in terms of jobs that are sort of noble or like respected, right? A lot of jobs that you get some sort of social respect for doing will often pay less than jobs that you don't. For example, teachers are a great example of this. To some degree, people look up to teachers, right? It is a respected job to have. Teachers also do not get paid very much relative to what they could earn in other fields most of the time. And yet, there's, as much as you see in the news about teacher shortages, there's never really been a whole lot of teacher shortages in this country. People are willing to do this job even at a relatively low wage. So it's not like schools are profit maximizers, but still, they don't have to raise their wages to attract teachers. And so if they were profit maximizing businesses, you wouldn't expect them to. And why would people still be willing to take that job even though it doesn't pay very much? Because they want to do it. They enjoy it. It brings a certain level of respect. You feel like you're doing something in the world. And so you're willing to take those as basically forms of compensation in lieu of money. which is not necessarily saying that that's how it should be, but that is what people are willing to do. And so you end up with lower wages in those jobs that people really want to do. So in short, when you are picking a job, right, this mechanism is all about what people are willing, what jobs people will accept. Okay? You don't just take into account the wage. People tend to think that economists are all about, assume that people try to make as much money as they possibly can for the rest of their lives. That's not true. We assume that people try to pursue their goals, but there are many different goals besides just money. This can include how much you enjoy doing your job, how good you feel about it. So if the job that you're trying to hire people for is distasteful in some way, it's not fun, people will look down on you for it, whatever, then you would expect the labor supply curve to be further in. Right? You would expect that fewer people are going to be willing to work at that job at any given wage, which means that for a given demand curve, you're going to have to pay them more to do it. The equilibrium wage is going to be higher. On the flip side, enjoyable jobs or jobs that people want to hold are going to have labor supply curves that are further out. You don't have to pay an ice cream taster very much because a lot of people would love to be an ice cream taster, right? All right. Based on this, the wage is going to be set based on supply and demand. A lot of people are willing to provide their labor to something. You don't have to pay them as much to do it. You expect the wages to be lower. Do keep in mind for all this all depends on skills being equal, right? So you can't just compare two wildly different jobs and say, oh, this must be compensating differentials. For example, imagine a job where you have to like work in sewage, right? Some people might like that. A lot of people probably would not. But these jobs often also don't tend to pay that much, which seems like it would go counter to the compensating differentials thing. Remember, you have to compare it to another job that requires a similar level and type of skill. And when you do that comparison, it looks like those jobs actually do tend to pay a bit more than you'd expect than what those other jobs would pay. All right, let's do a quick survey just to sort of lock in our ideas here, what this actually means. So I have two questions for you. So one, I want you to write down what your realistic dream job is. And by realistic, I mean a job that you can actually realistically imagine yourself getting in the future. So don't write down like, multimillionaire rap star, even if that's your dream. Write down, a job that you think might actually realistically be in your future. I mean, I don't know your skills. Maybe you got it. Once you've written that down, I want you to take a guess at how much you think that job would pay. You don't necessarily have to know exactly. You don't have to do any Googling. Just what do you think it's going to pay if you got that dream job? Once you've written that down, I want you to write down a second job that is not your dream job, but would also be fine, right? You wouldn't be, discouraged if that was the job for the rest of your life, but it's not your dream job, right? A job that would be fine, but it's not your dream job. So write that down too. All right, so once you got those all down, here's what I want you to do. I want you to imagine that you've been offered your dream job at the salary that you wrote down. Okay? Or you've been offered this alternate job, but at a higher salary. I want you to write down for me how high the alternate salary would need to be for you to take the alternate job over your dream job. So for example, let's say that my dream job is, you can write it on accountant. Let's say my dream job is accountant. So, and I think that an accountant is going to pay, I don't know, $100,000 a year. And my alternate job, which is not as enjoyable to me, is office manager. So you offer me accountant at $100,000 or office manager at some other value. What's it going to take to get me to take the office manager job? Maybe you'd have to offer me $150,000 to get me to take the office manager job, right? Any lower than that, I'm going to go be an accountant for less money. So write down what you would need to get paid to take the alternate job rather than your dream. All right, let's take one of your examples. So who's got an example for me? Who wants to tell me your dream job?
Foreign service officer.
Foreign service officer. All right, and then what do you think that pays? All right, and then what's the alternate?
Field mechanic.
What kind of mechanic? Field mechanic.
Service.
Okay, so then what would field mechanic have to offer you to get you to be a field mechanic over a foreign service officer?
125.
All right, so in order to lure you away from your dream job, I need to offer you an additional 40K. So if we imagine that everybody else also has preferences like yours, then we would expect that field mechanic would pay about $40,000 more than for a service officer, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to hire any field mechanics, right? If they tried to, only offer $100,000 for a field mechanic, everyone would be like, no, I'll just go be a field service officer or a foreign service officer, right? And so we would expect that this is what the wages would look like, if, assuming these are all similarly skilled jobs. That's the idea here. How much money do I have to offer you additionally to lure you away from the job that you really want?